All right, ladies and gentlemen, Baron here. So we've got more patch 1.59 news, updates, some screenshots of this beautiful M551 Sheridan right here. And also, I figured to make things more interesting, we played the M551 in combat. Obviously, it's not out for War Thunder right now. So I went ahead and played it in Armored Warfare, where you can use its 152 millimeter main gun as well as the ATGMs, because this will be the American vehicle, the American tank in War Thunder that will have ATGMs, because the devs have said that every nation who has armored vehicles, sorry Japan, will have a vehicle, a tank, that can fire ATGMs. So it's not just the Russians, which is one of the things that I was literally gonna poop myself over. Not really. Who really wants to poop themselves, right? If only the Russians had one. So that was not something I was looking forward to, but we don't have to look forward to that. Every nation will have a vehicle with ATGMs. I'm still uncertain. I'm still undecided on ATGMs in general. It could be cool. It really all depends. It really all depends how well it's balanced and how well it's used, and the strengths and the weaknesses of these missiles, so that they're not overpowered or it's not. And then honestly, there's the community aspect, where certain vehicles, no matter how cool or interesting they might be, if they're perceived as a money grab by the community, they're generally thought of as negative, despite if they added like some interesting gameplay mechanics or a new weapon system to the game. That's one of those really awkward things with free-to-play game titles, is that, you know, sometimes you're trying to produce a pretty damn good game for free and you want to make money, and it really all depends on how the community perceives it. If you're a money-grubbing, you know, proletariat, or if you're trying to appease the masses, right, or basically make a good game. But we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about some of the news that's come out recently. There's a dev over on the Russian servers that's just, I don't know if he's like in the gulag and has like a radio or a typewriter or messenger pigeons or something. He's getting this information out, if Gaijin sent him to the gulag, or if Gaijin is using him as a secret agent. You know, but in all seriousness, he's a dev over on the Russian servers, and he's putting out all this pretty good information, and that's where I got the screenshots for the M551 Sheridan, which should be pretty cool. There's some interesting facts. So the main talking point today will be the M551 Sheridan, and then we're going to go over some of the other things that they're just little tidbits of information regarding patch 1.59, 1.61, and just the general progress and direction of the game in the next two patches. So we'll save that bit of information for after covering the Sheridan. We get to see it in Armored Warfare. If anyone thinks this is War Thunder, you're crazy, and you might have to be sent to the gulag, I can promise you that. So, without further ado, the Sheridan is basically an all-in-one American armored vehicle. It's amphibious. It was supposed to be, or it was designed to be able to swim across rivers that were about 50 yards long. So this is not like a PT-76 where it's, you know, very versatile in the water. This is just like if you come across a river, like it specifically said that, like, hey, we come across rivers, we'll be able to ford them, right? The Patton tanks and other armored vehicles that the Americans used in the Vietnam era, because that's what this tank is from, weren't able to do that. Interestingly enough, the amphibious equipment on the Sheridan actually helped them defeat, or rather combat, RPG rounds. So basically heat rounds, you know, smaller heat rounds, but heat rounds nonetheless, shaped charges more or less. Another cool thing about it was that it was airborne launched. It could it was able to parachute into combat areas. And you may ask yourself, hey, hold on a second, how is a tank able to both swim and be launched via parachute and land, you know, fly out of a plane? That's a funny thought. Love to have that in World War mode. I'm just going to put that one out there. So why is that, right? How is that possible? Tanks are really heavy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is an incredibly light tank. The armor on this thing should be comical at best. It was an aluminum vehicle, you know, and it's lighter than the T-92 American light tank. The T-92 has a weight of around 18.5 tons. The Sheridan has a weight of 15.2 tons. Think about that for a minute. That's kind of insane. This is going to be a very, very light tank, but you can see even just from like how Armored Warfare depicted the tank, and that's not going to say that's how War Thunder is going to depict the tank, right? But they both try to go for accuracy, so you can kind of get a hint as to how this vehicle will play. It's a light tank, it's amphibious, and it's airborne launch. What does that mean? That means this thing's going to be pretty fast, I anticipate. It had a top speed of 45 miles per hour. It should be pretty spry and pretty easy to drive and get up to speed because it's light. Now, the main thing, and one of the reasons that they're adding it, I believe, is not for its amphibious properties, which still we don't really have any maps that really use that as an advantage, but we only have one amphibious tank, so you can't really get, too crotchety over that. But the fact that it's able to use anti-tank guided missiles. Missiles, ladies and gentlemen. This patch might be all known for the missile patch, whether it is done well, which I surely hope and kind of expect it to, but you know what? I've been proved wrong before, and I've been proved right before. And this fires the Shillelagh. Is that how you pronounce it? Shillelagh anti-tank guided missile, the M551 in Shillelagh for you guys. It means club or cudgel, or basically it was I was going to say in Irish, but Irish uses the English language. Yeah, that's a terrible accent. So we're going to have missiles, Shillelagh missiles, the Irish club missiles. And what's cool about this is it's not going to be launched like the IS-1. It is kind of the missile doctrine developed differently. The Soviets pretty much used ones that were fired from launchers, and the Americans, NATO powers, basically, for the most part, used missiles that were fired from the gun barrels. So that's why the M551 has a 152 millimeter main gun, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that thing fired these M51 Shillelagh missiles. I love that word, from the gun barrel of the vehicle. So that's pretty cool. However, we'll go over some basic statistics of Shillelaghs. It's got a 15-pound warhead, and it's basically a shaped warhead, for max armor penetration. So it's equivalent. It's more or less in concept, very, very similar to a heat round, right? High explosive anti-tank round. Now, the interesting thing about this, though, is ATGMs can be guided, but they have to fire. It's almost like a torpedo. Now, bear with me for a second. In that you fire it, and then there's a certain distance at which it finally becomes active, and it is then steerable, right? Or in torpedoes' cases, they launch, and then they're able to explode within a minimum distance, and then they have a maximum range. So they have a minimum distance whereby they're activated, and then a maximum range at which the propellant of the missile, of the warhead, gives out, and then it's kaput, right? So the minimum range of this thing is 800 yards. So you're not going to, if they implement it historically, and that's really what War Thunder tries to go for, this thing is not going to be able to be guided by the player until after 800 yards. So that means at short to medium ranges, you're not really going to be able to use this in a guided fashion. You still should be able to fire it in. If there's nothing between you and the enemy tank, it should be able to disable them or destroy them, right? If it hits, I would imagine. I'm not really sure how they're going to implement this. So it's got a very, very long minimum range. Now, just carefully analyze that word choice, but I basically described how it works. A long minimum range and a somewhat short maximum range. The maximum range is 2,200 yards as far as missiles go, right? For our intents and purposes in the maps that are in War Thunder, 2,200 yards is pretty damn good. And actually, it might be better for ATGMs to have sort of maybe a limitation on their max range, especially since they can be guided by us. So there's going to be people out there doing like Steph Curry shots with ATGMs. Yeah, marinate on that for a moment. So that would be interesting. And then just like a fun historical fact, about the Shillelagh missiles was that the only time they were used in combat was in 1991 in the Gulf War, where they were used by Sheridans, who were still in use, to attack Saddam's bunkers. You got to talk about Saddam like this. It's just the American way. So now let's go into the 152 millimeter main gun. That is the same diameter as the KV2, 152 millimeters. So what do we know about the KV2? Very slow reload, massive recoil, and it's got a very slow and low velocity, right? However, once it connects, it's likely to destroy everything it comes up against. Now, since it's a modern vehicle, it's going to use heat rounds, right? So it's basically going to be an upper tier KV2 as far as how I'm thinking about it right now. We don't have reactive armor or anything that's really designed to combat against heat rounds at this point. I mean, if they're adding ATGMs, we might get that stuff in the future. So I would anticipate that while it is going to have a slow reload, massive recoil, and incredibly low velocity for the heat rounds, they should basically act just like a KV2. They should knock out whatever they hit for the most part, or do massive damage. But there's obviously many cases in which heat rounds, certain angling and stuff like that, whereby they're not nearly as effective. But so you got to account for the fact that when you account for your weapon systems and the fact that the missiles are fired from the barrel, so it's not like you can fire a missile and then fire a round out of your main gun. Your main gun is what fires the missiles and what fires these 152 millimeter heat round shells, right? So the missiles themselves are not as good, I would say, or not your preferred weapon system at short range, but medium to long, and then your 152 millimeter shells are what you'd probably want to go for at short range. But the reload system between that, so you might find yourself in a situation where you've got a missile loaded or a shell loaded, and your target is not at the optimum range for whichever one you have loaded, and then you got this terrible situation. The KV2, you got HE rounds and then those concrete busting rounds. But anyway, but imagine a KV2 that has a speed of 45 miles an hour. That's pretty cool, right? So that's what we've got on the Sheridan right now. I'm anticipating that we're going to get some more information this week. Definitely this week or next week, I'm pretty sure. But that's speculative. But that's just the stuff that I looked up right now. So now let's go to what this Russian dev has been putting out on the forums. That's where I got the information for yesterday's video. And then we've got the ASU-57 that came out. So ATGM vehicles are planned for every ground forces tree in the game, and most certainly in the same patch. 1.59 will be a very large patch. There's going to be dev blogs put out every 1 to 2 days, just like patch 1.57. And that's supposed to start next week. So is that next week or this week, right? Either way, very soon, trademarked. Now, they disclosed how repair cost is calculated. Basically, it's based off of efficiency. Deaths to kills ratio is the main factor in repair costs. So if you're more effective, the more effective the vehicle, the more expensive it is to repair. We've all known that, but every time I see it, I don't know. I'm not a game developer, but that seems interesting. So they're planning on decreasing repair costs, but there's no promises trademarked, right? So, and they're planning on adding a bunch of top tanks for every nation, which will definitely be in by patch 1.61. So maybe not necessarily 1.59. And then every patch, few most popular tanks that people play the most will get the armor modification upgrades that like the T-34 1942 has, for example. There's probably like 6 or 7 in the game right now, I think, maybe more, that have that armor upgrade, like the Panther and the T-34, the ones that I know I use a lot or like to use a lot, that have that armor upgrade. So it's kind of interesting that will slowly but surely spread to at least the majority of tanks in the game. So the M551 Sheridan is coming out. I don't know if you guys have heard anything on that. It will have ATGMs and heat shells. high explosive and heat shells, and it will be a light tank in tier 5, and it won't swim initially, similar to how the PT-76. But it was kind of like the Sherman duplex drive in that, like, in order to swim, you wouldn't be able to shoot, so that kind of sucks. And so it's not really like a PT-76. It was more like a field kit that allowed you to swim. So they want to increase the number of floating and swimming tanks in patch 1.59. So if you guys have any ideas or suggestions as to what vehicles that would be, you can put that below. There's an ASU-85 work in progress. So we've seen the ASU-57. Then there's the bigger brother with the 85mm gun, the ASU-85. And there's going to be at least 2 self-propelled guns for USSR planned. Obviously, ASU-57 is one of them. So then there's the Sturre Emil, Tier 4 tank destroyer. And it's confirmed to come out in this patch. It will have the most powerful gun in the game. That's a quote. The most powerful gun in the game. 128mm, 60 calibers long. Sturre will be faster than the Dicker Max. So, faster than the Dicker Max and the most powerful gun in the game sounds pretty awesome. There's no information on the Ontos. If you want, just look up the Ontos, the M50 Ontos. Basically, recoilless rifles. It's an interesting weapon system that we have not seen in the game yet. There's certain armored cars that could implement that, and then there's certain tank vehicles like the Ontos that use those. So the IS-6 is not in the nearest plans, but it will come out. That's kind of scary. The Tupolev 4 is waiting for dev blogs, so that will likely come out, and the Tupolev 4 is very similar to some American bombers. New heavy tanks for the USSR or the United States of America are planned. T-29 was one of those that was mentioned. Bombs are being reworked. T-62 is coming out and a work in progress. Rest in peace, America. Rest in peace, the free world. We got Soviet T-62s rolling out of Moscow. That's some... as long as we have tanks to combat it, you know, that's all well and good. But if we don't, well, you need to go to the gulag. So the Navy is under the non-disclosure agreements. So even if I knew about it, I couldn't tell you guys about it. So there's that. And they're planning to add anti-tank rockets, which won't be guided. They're rockets, not missiles. And then they're looking into smoke shells. Now, don't get confused smoke grenade launchers with smoke shells. Smoke shells are planned, and they're in closed tests going on right now. And the only tanks that had them will have them in the game. So I think that's a lot of American vehicles. Historical scopes, working on that. Smoke arty is not excluded. To be added. What does that mean? Does that mean they're going to add smoke arty? That'd be really cool. In fact, there's a few situations where I've dropped arty just in front of me just to try to, like, visually just, you know, kick up some dirt to kind of conceal me, like when you're disabled and getting shot at by everybody because you drove out in the middle of the field and you're dumb. You know, I've done that many a time. They're going to improve a lot of models for tanks and aircraft. They mentioned the Spitfire 9 and the T-54. Shilka, Gepard, and Vulcan will come out. New jets are planned, and they're planning on releasing, drumroll please, a French tree for ground forces and air forces dev blogs. They're going to put those out, so it's a work in progress. They say that they're going to come out this year, so don't expect that in patch 1.59. There's no plans for supersonic jets. And finally, they also mentioned that a Tier 5 tank destroyer for Germans may be an anti-tank guided missile system. So there's some pretty interesting ideas with regards to that. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is more or less the future of the next 2 patches, and then beyond with the whole mention of the French trees that will be put out in devlog. So we'll be able to look at every vehicle that they have planned. Granted, with a lot of the nations we already have, there's some vehicles on the tech trees that we have not seen yet. So, you know, there's that to consider. But I hope you enjoyed it. That's some good information. M551 Sheridan with its shillelagh missiles, anti-tank guided missiles, is basically a 15.2 ton, 45 mile per hour racing tier 5 KV2. And it's American, so I think that should be interesting. Not going to have a very good survivability, but it should be able to dish out the paint. It will be the very definition of a glass derp cannon. So, ladies and gentlemen, just your news by myself, BaronVonGamez, and some Armored Warfare gameplay and War Thunder news. Because you know what? I get to make the videos, so I get to do this stuff. But I find it entertaining, and I hope you do as well. So stay tuned to the channel, as we're going to have lots of updates and news in the coming weeks. And I'll see you soon.